It's now a great honor to introduce our keynote speaker to you. Dr. van Wyngaard is currently serving as pastor of the Swaziland Reformed Church, the Wyngaard congregation, and has been a pastor for the past 27 years, during which time responsibility was taken to start with the training and development of indigenous church leaders. In 2006, he became CEO of Wyngaard Reformed Church-based care, SHBC. Dr. van Wyngaard matriculated at Port Natal High School in Durban, South Africa. He obtained the degrees BA and BD, a postgraduate diploma from the University of Pretoria. He obtained the degree, his doctorate in the Science of Mission from the UNISA, that's University of South Africa. Dr. van Wyngaard completed the Advanced Health Management Program, cum laude, in 2011. This program was co-certified by the Yale School of Public Health and the Foundation for Professional Development. In 2008, he received the Courageous Leadership Award, co-sponsored by World Vision and the Willow Creek Association, for outstanding work done in the field of HIV and AIDS. Dr. van Wyngaard is married to Wilma, and together they have 3 sons and 1 daughter. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. van Wyngaard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johan, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here today. I also had the opportunity to speak last year, and thank you very much for the privilege of inviting me to be here again with you this year. I was recently privileged to attend the Global Leadership Summit, where some of the world's best known leaders were gathered and where they were speaking and addressing the audience. You will obviously recognize such names as Jim Collins, author of bestsellers such as Built to Last, From Good to Great, and more recently, Great by Choice. I'm sure all of you have read the books, and if you haven't, make sure that you do that. One of the other speakers was Patrick Lencioni, well-known author of books such as The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team and Death by Meeting. And some of the other names of the speakers were Carly Fiorina, former CEO of Hewlett Packard, and Condoleezza Rice, former USA Secretary of State. Now, these speakers are all respected internationally as leaders in the corporate world. But what you may not know is that all of them are also outspoken Christians and unashamedly profess their faith in God. I had attended the Global Leadership Summit with the intention to learn more about leadership, especially in my role as pastor of a church and also as CEO of Swaziland Home-Based Care. As leaders in the corporate world, I felt that they could surely teach me a thing or two about management skills. However, after listening to their presentations, and especially where each one of them at some point made mention of the fact that they were Christians, I could not help asking myself what the influence of their faith had been and their active involvement in the church on their success in the corporate world. And in a certain sense, these people embody for me the intersection of both worlds, the world of faith and the harsh reality of the corporate world. And when Johan asked me whether I would be willing to speak at PMR Africa's Leaders and Achievers Awards function, my thoughts kept going back to the interaction between the church and its wide variety of ministries and the corporate world, and especially on what we could learn from each other. In my work as pastor of a small congregation in the Swaziland region of Swaziland, and even more so in my work as CEO of Swaziland Home-Based Care, I'm constantly looking for ways in which to improve my own as well as my leadership team's management abilities. After 30 years of being a pastor and having observed my own mistakes, which I've made, and there are many of them, as well as the mistakes of many other church leaders, I'm becoming increasingly convinced that the church as a whole needs to learn some very important lessons from the corporate world. Obviously, the church and corporates have different goals and objectives, and success is measured in different ways. But the church has so much that it can learn from the corporate world in order to make a greater impact on the communities within which it functions. In 1995, Rick Warren, senior pastor of Saddleback Valley Community Church in California, published a book with the title The Purpose-Driven Church, in which he made the point that churches need to have a vision and mission for which it exists. Soon afterwards, churches all over the world started formulating visions and missions. And wherever you went in a church, as you entered the doors, somewhere in a prominent place, these visions and missions would be displayed for all to read. Unfortunately, as is the case in many corporates as well, this was often done not so much to guide the church in what it does, but more often because people seem to believe that this would become the magic wand for success. But as we all know, there isn't a magic wand for success, neither in the corporate world nor in the church. Patrick Lencioni, who has a fairly strong view on this issue, writes in his book, The Advantage, Why Organizational Health Trumps Everything Else in Business. He says that it can't be denied that most mission statements have neither inspired people to change the world, nor provided them with an accurate description of what an organization actually does for a living. They certainly haven't created alignment and clarity amongst employees. What they have done is make many leadership teams look foolish. Lencioni then proceeds to outline 6 critical questions which he has proven will help corporates in their quest to align the entire leadership towards their common goals. And the 6 questions are the following. Why do we exist? How do we behave? What do we do? How will we succeed? What is most important right now? And the 6th question, who must do what? The fact is, although the 6-point plan was developed for the corporate world, this is equally true for the church and faith-based organizations. In the same way that any financial institution, any communications company, or any manufacturer of soft drinks, or whatever you are doing, need a plan, so the church also needs a plan. The church also needs a vision, or in the words of Rick Warren, it needs to understand the purpose of its existence. The church also needs measurable goals and objectives. And the church also needs to have well-defined and non-negotiable values which determine the way it functions. Where churches function in this way, we also see the positive results in the same way that we can see the results when a corporate starts applying these basic management methods. A church or a faith-based organization can never fully function in the same way as a corporate. One reason being that a church or faith-based organization's ultimate goal is not to make a financial profit. Success in a church is not measured in how much money is collected, but rather in how much money was invested in building the kingdom of God. Success is not measured in terms of how much those on the inside gain, but rather in terms of how much those on the outside gain. It has been said that the church is the only organization which does not exist for the benefit of its shareholders, but rather for the benefit of those who are not shareholders yet. The longer I am involved in church leadership, as well in the leadership of a non-profit faith-based organization, the more I realize how much I have to learn from leaders in the corporate world. But as I mentioned earlier, I keep on asking myself the question whether those in the corporate management, you sitting here today, could learn something from principles which may be more familiar in the church and faith-based organizations. And I would like to mention 3 aspects which I believe may help corporates to increase their capacity. First of all, principles of level 5 leadership. Secondly, integrity. And in the third place, customer focus. Let's start with the first one, level 5 leadership. In his groundbreaking book, Good to Great, Why Some Companies Make the Leap and Others Don't, Jim Collins distinguishes between 5 levels of leadership. First of all, he speaks of level 1 leadership, highly capable individual. And he defines this in the following way: makes productive contributions through talent knowledge, skills, and good work habits. All of us here today, I think, would be considered as a level 1 leader. Level 2 leader, contributing team member, contributes individual capabilities to the achievement of group objectives and works effectively with others in a group setting. Once again, I'm sure all of us here would comply with what he describes as a level 2 leader. Level 3 leader, a competent manager, organizes people and resources toward the effective and efficient pursuit of predetermined objectives. I'm pretty sure all of us would be considered as level 3 leaders. A level 4 leader, an effective leader, catalyzes commitment to and vigorous pursuit of a clear and compelling vision, stimulating higher performance standards. Probably most of us here today would be considered as a level 4 leader. But then it comes to what he describes as a level 5 leader, an executive, builds enduring greatness through a paradoxical blend of personal humility and professional will. Now, without question, every single one of us present here today would like to be considered what Jim Collins describes as a level 5 leader. In this room today, we have gathered the top executives of companies in Swaziland, all in one place. Sadly, if we take Jim Collins' research seriously, then it is possible that some of us present here today will not last in our positions. It is even possible that some of the companies represented here today may not exist in 20 years' time. The question that Collins asks is, what is it that causes one CEO to lead his or her company or organization to success in spite of difficult circumstances, financial problems, or whatever, while another witnesses how things grow not from good to great, but rather from bad to worse, until the inevitable happens, either being replaced as CEO or filing for bankruptcy. In his research of 28 companies, 11 of which grew in a spectacular way over a period of at least 15 years, Collins came to some very interesting conclusions about the reasons for their success. Obviously, circumstances play a role, like being at the right place at the right time. But he said in all of these 11 great companies, which include such names as Gillette, Walgreens and Kimberly-Clark, a few common denominators were found. 10 of the 11 good to great CEOs came from inside the company rather than bringing in someone from the outside. In other words, he says, often people in a company say, well, there's a great CEO working for that company, and because he made a success there, we could bring that person into our company and he would do equally well. He says, the facts show that this is not the case. Furthermore, great CEOs did not necessarily receive an enormous salary. Thirdly, the great companies did not only focus on what to do, they equally focused on what not to do and what to stop doing. However, he said that there was one common denominator in all of these companies, that this one thing was the same in all of the companies that he researched and that went from good to great. And this had to do with leadership style. And Collins says that this style is totally contradictory to what we normally consider to be that of a successful CEO. In fact, as Collins puts it, to him it seemed as if these leaders came from Mars. He describes them as unassertive, quiet, reserved, even shy. He describes them as a paradoxical blend of personal humility and professional will. Now obviously, being unassertive, reserved and shy does not necessarily make one a great leader. But the point that Collins is trying to make is that the difference between a good CEO and a great CEO has a lot to do with leadership style. And it was when I read this for the first time a few years ago that it struck me that Colin's description of a level 5 leader resonated almost exactly with the message of Jesus Christ when he spoke to his disciples about leadership. One day, after his disciples had been arguing amongst themselves which of them were the greatest, Jesus came with a radical new approach to leadership. And he said to them, "You've observed how godless rulers throw their weight around," he said, "and when people get a little power, how quickly it goes to their heads. It's not going to be that way with you. Whoever wants to be great must become a servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave. That is what the Son of Man has done. He came to serve, not to be served." Now, I think it needs to be understood that this attitude of humility has nothing to do with meekness or indecisiveness. The disciples eventually became great leaders, and one could hardly accuse disciples like Peter, John, and Paul of being indecisive. On the contrary. In fact, Collins specifically mentions that level 5 leaders have an extremely strong will to succeed, but that it is exactly this paradox of humility combined with a strong will that characterizes a great leader. He writes, "It's not that level 5 leaders have no ego or self-interest. Indeed, they are incredibly ambitious. But their ambition is first and foremost for the institution and not themselves." I think we should give credit to Collins for identifying this particular style of successful leadership. But we also need to keep in mind that this leadership style was being taught 2,000 years ago. The second point I would like to touch on concerns integrity. I really do not need to take up your time with examples of companies and organizations lacking integrity. We only have to open a newspaper or tune into the TV news to be confronted once again with revelations of corruption and dishonesty. I had a look at the Observer this morning, just page through it quickly. The stories are there. Go and look it up. You'll find it there. I'm fully aware that churches also suffer under the same accusations. Unfortunately, churches are made up of people, and there will always be people who will try to find ways to enrich themselves at the cost of others. But of course, this is not how it should be. When Christ spoke to his followers, he commanded them to live above reproach and to set an example of absolute integrity. A friend of mine who has been tasked to chair a committee to develop an ethics code for their company uses me from time to time as soundboard to phrase certain parts of the document. In a recent discussion, I made the remark that no company will ever radiate a sense of integrity if those in leadership, starting with the CEO and working down from that person, do not set the example, not only by living honestly, but also by having zero tolerance for any form of dishonesty or corruption. This is true for corporates, non-profits, and churches alike. In fact, in my discussions, I made the remark that we need to live above the standards set out in our ethical codes. To live by the code is good, but we need to go one step further and raise our own personal standards of integrity to exceed the expectations found in official documents. And as I said this, I realized once again that this is absolutely in line with what Christ asked from his followers. In biblical times, when Jesus was on earth, the Pharisees were known for their ability to live exactly according to the written law. Everything that they did was commanded by law. But Jesus called his followers to rise above the written law and to do even more than was expected by law. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "Trivialize even the smallest item in God's law and you will only have trivialized yourself. But take it seriously, show the way for others, and you will find honor in the kingdom. Unless you do far better than the Pharisees in the matters of right living, you won't know the first thing about entering the kingdom." And in a time when we are continually confronted by news reports of corruption in government, corporates, and other companies and organizations, the challenge which we need to face is how to live in such a way that we not only meet, but rather exceed expectations of integrity. I believe that Christ told us how to do this. Don't live by the law. Do more than what the law expects you to do. Which brings me to my last remark, and this is customer focus. In March this year, the South African-born Greg Smith, who had been an executive director of the New York-based investment bank Goldman Sachs, resigned from the bank. His resignation letter was published in newspapers and on the internet. In his letter, he stated the reasons for his resignation. To put the problem in the simplest terms, the interests of the client continue to be sidelined in the way the firm operates and thinks about making money. He then continues by saying what had changed in the bank over the past few years. The culture was the secret sauce that made this place great and allowed us to earn our clients' trust for 143 years. It wasn't just about making money. This alone will not sustain a firm for so long. It had something to do with pride and belief in the organization. I'm sad to say that I look around today and see virtually no trace of the culture that made me love working for this firm for many years. Smith explains, "It makes me ill how callously people talk about ripping the clients off. Over the last 12 months, I've seen 5 different managing directors refer to their own clients as muppets, sometimes over internal email." To be honest, I don't think I'll ever be able to walk into a bank again without wondering if someone behind the counter is referring to me as a muppet. But let's move away from banks. I'm sure that all of us have had our quota of horror stories to share regarding international flights, delayed flights, cancelled flights, unexpected stayovers, lost luggage. Patrick Lencioni loves Southwest Airlines. He has a lot of stories to share about his personal experience with this airline, all of them positive. One of his stories is how he missed a flight. He then went to a counter to inquire about the possibility of changing his ticket to a later flight. I don't know how many of you have tried that, and you'll know how difficult that is. The lady behind the counter smiled at him, tapped a few keys on the keyboard, and changed his flight. The cost? $0. No calls to a supervisor to ask permission, no complaining, no cost. A seat was available on a later flight, and she was only too glad to help him. No wonder this airline is still going strong when one after the other airline files for bankruptcy. But once again, this is not a new principle. Starting with the ancient religion of the Israelites and continuing the story throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, God's focus has always been on people. In one of his parables, Christ specifically refers to a man whose main focus was on collecting enormous wealth for himself, and the parable ends when God asks the rhetorical question, "Fool, tonight you die, and your barn full of goods, who gets it?" And for me, this raises a question, what legacy it is that we will leave behind when we die? Will we be remembered for the huge profits we made for ourselves or for our company? Or will we be remembered for what we did to give our clients an exceptional experience every time that they entered our doors or made use of our products? The late Carlo Ndukwe once said, "The things you do for yourself are gone when you are gone, but the things you do for others remain as your legacy." What will our legacy be? After 30 years as a pastor of a church here in Swaziland, and also in KwaZulu-Natal 2 years before I came to Swaziland, I'm still amazed at what church members are willing to do without receiving any compensation for their services. I'm not saying that corporate should stop paying salaries to their employees and only make use of volunteers, but I do think that the principle of walking the proverbial extra mile, once again something that Jesus taught his followers, is a lesson to be learned by all corporates. The following anecdote illustrating how, once again, Southwest Airlines walk the extra mile for a client, might help us to understand this lesson in a practical way. A man was en route from a business trip in Los Angeles to his daughter's home in Denver to see his 3-year-old grandson for the last time. The boy, beaten into a coma by his mother's live-in boyfriend, was being taken off of life support at 9 p.m. that evening, so his organs could be used to save other lives. The man's wife called Southwest Airlines to arrange the last-minute flight and explain the emergency situation. Unfortunately, the man was held up by traffic and didn't make it to the gate on time. When he finally arrived, 12 minutes after the plane was scheduled to leave, he was shocked to find the pilot waiting for him. He thanked the pilot profusely, and the pilot said, "They can't go anywhere without me, and I wasn't going anywhere without you. Now relax, we'll get you there. And again, I'm so sorry about your grandson." I'm convinced if Greg Smith should apply for a post at Southwest Airlines, that he would probably be extremely happy to work there. No wonder Patrick Lencioni always flies with Southwest Airlines whenever it's possible. Inasmuch as I believe that the church has to learn from corporates how to apply managerial skills to the running of their churches and other faith-based organizations, so I believe that corporates also have a lot to learn from churches and faith-based organizations and the principles and values they stand for. I'm fully aware of the complexity of the economic and political problems in Swaziland, but walking the extra mile might be the way of giving people hope again. Apart from dealing in products and services, we can also transact hope in the way that we deal with people. In this time when the future seems a bit murky and when none of us can be 100% sure of what lies ahead, the answer for our companies might partially lie in applying the principles which we find in the words of people like Lencioni, Collins and Smith, principles which, if we are honest, are found in the words of Christ himself as he taught his followers how to live focused on other people. The recently re-elected President of the United States excellently sums this up when he says, "The best way to not feel hopeless is to get up and do something. Don't wait for good things to happen to you. If you go out and make some good things happen, you will fill the world with hope. You will fill yourself with hope." You, representing the corporate world, and I, representing the church, can both do something to bring hope into the world in which we live. And my desire is that this will one day be our legacy. Thank you.